Yaser Said, an Egyptian American living the American dream, successful as a taxi cab driver, owning his own taxi cab. He was an Egyptian born national. He later became an American citizen and was successful financially, raising a family outside of Dallas, Texas. He was married, and his first child was a son. And then he had two gorgeous daughters, Amina and Sarah. All of his kids were 1 year apart. But the proud father would soon allow his pride to go too far, and he would kill in cold blood. Pride. Pride is defined as an excessive love of oneself, an excessive belief in one's abilities or qualities. It's often considered the root of all other sins. This is the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Wilcott. I've been a TV anchor, a judge, a trial lawyer, and I would say that almost every case I've ever followed and ever dealt with intersects with one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues, temptation that when taken too far, turn deadly. This week, we break down the case of Yaser Said and how the deadly sin of pride resulted in the cold-blooded, brutal murder of both of his teenage daughters. A little later, I am joined by Michael Jaafer in our breakdown segment, where we go deep on the how and the why of one of the most blatant examples of an honor killing in the 21st century. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. Honor killings are described as acts of violence, most often murdered, carried out by male family members against primarily female family members who are believed to have degraded the family's honor. This is the story of such a murderous honor killing. Patricia Owens goes by the nickname Tizzy. She met Yaser Said when she was just 14 years old. Said was 14 years older than her, working at a Circle K in her neighborhood, and he took a liking to Patricia. The two dated for just 2 months before getting married. Patricia was 15 years old, and at that time, Texas law allowed for the marriage so long as she had the permission of her parents to marry. She did get that permission, and they were married, and she stopped going to high school. Patricia quickly became pregnant with their very first child, a son named Islam. The couple moved around a lot in the very first year, but finally landed in an apartment before their second child, a daughter named Amina, was born, followed by their third child, another daughter, Sarah. Each of the 3 children were a year apart when they were born. Yaser Said was described as very controlling by his family members, and he ended up thinking that his daughters dishonored the family by rejecting traditional Islamic cultural behavior. He often instructed his son, the oldest child, Islam, to spy on his daughters by video or audio taping them without their knowledge. Sarah, the youngest, got a job working in a convenience store, just like her father had when he was younger. But Said videotaped her at work and then punished her for smiling too much at the customers. Amina met her first boyfriend, Joseph, while she was taking Taekwondo classes. She told Joseph, "Don't ever call me or text me if I send this code word to you," because she feared her father would go through her phone. Said did find a note that Amina had written to Joseph, her first boyfriend, and she had to tell her father that the letter was written to an imaginary friend. But Said was furious that Amina had lied to him and defied him, and immediately moved his family from Bedford, Texas, 20 miles away, to a home in Louisville, Texas. Amina and her boyfriend Joseph made plans to run away, and they thought, we're going to get married in Las Vegas and start a new life. Joseph dropped out of high school to earn money so that he and Amina could leave Texas. During this time, her father Said threatened to kill her if she did not provide Joseph's name to him. As a result, Amina emailed her history teacher at Louisville High School and said, "My father intends to kill me." He'd often take Amina to Egypt to arrange for a marriage to a much older friend, but she would reject the union. Fast forward, and Amina had a new boyfriend, and on Christmas Eve in 2007, her new boyfriend, Edgar, her sister Sarah, and Sarah's boyfriend Eric all fled the state of Texas with their mother Patricia. This is the same Patricia that married Said when she was only 15 years old. And she took her daughters to live a better life in Oklahoma. Before they reached their destination, the group of travelers stopped in Kansas to visit with Patricia's family members. But the girls, Sarah and Amina, didn't want to stay in Kansas because they were convinced that their father would immediately know where to look for them and find them, and they were afraid of their father. The travelers continued to Oklahoma to rent an apartment and got jobs and prepare for their new jobs to help Amina and Sarah attend college and really look forward to a better life without the fear of being hurt by their father. But this escape didn't last long because Patricia, the mother, convinced them to return to Texas. Sarah was reluctant but agreed to return to Texas to her father. But Amina feared her father more and refused to go with her mother and sister. Amina chose to stay with her boyfriend, only to find Patricia, the mother, pounding on the door, demanding that Amina, 18 at the time, return home. Her mother insisted that she return home and said, "Your dad's forgiven you, and he wants us to all return home." So they ended up returning home. On January 1st, after they returned home to the father, and they are 17 and 18 years old, January 1st of 2005, Said took Amina and Sarah to his taxi and said that he was taking them to eat at Denny's. And Patricia, the mother, wanted to go too, and he said, "No, I want you to stay home because I want to talk to my daughters alone." Said drove both girls to an unknown, secluded location in Irving, Texas, and shot them inside his cab. Amina died instantly. Sarah, though, was able to call 911. She can be heard on the 911 tape yelling, screaming, "I'm dying. My dad shot me. I'm dying." After shooting both daughters multiple times, he drove their bodies to a taxi stand outside an Omni hotel, where another taxi driver discovered the vehicle with the lifeless bodies of Amina and Sarah. The family shared disturbing family details and dynamics that led to the killings. It was said that Said murdered his daughters when he discovered they had been dating Western men outside of the Muslim religion. Relatives also alleged that Said physically and emotionally abused both daughters, Amina and Sarah. There was also history. There was an investigation against Said when the girls were 8 and 9 years old, alleging that he had sexually abused his daughters. The mother, Patricia, known as Tizzy, had signed a complaint stating that he abused them sexually. But she withdrew the complaint, and the girls recanted their testimony. As a result, any charges for sexual abuse of the daughters were dropped. After the girls were found dead inside his taxicab, Said could not be located for 12 years. He was on the run for 12 years. In 2017, a maintenance worker in Bedford, Texas, was called to an apartment for a leaky pipe And when he arrived, he knocked on the door, and there was an older gentleman he didn't recognize who opened the door and allowed the worker to repair the pipe. After leaving the apartment, the worker notified the leasing office. There was someone in that apartment who he had never seen there who appeared to be living there, and the leasing office called law enforcement. Law enforcement was able to learn that that individual was Yaser Said. But when they got to the apartment, they could not find Yaser Said. He had escaped. He had eluded police again, and the police learned that Islam, the son, and his brother, the children's uncle, had helped relocate Said just 40 miles outside of Dallas, Texas. The police started a surveillance, and after a week, the FBI and local law enforcement arrested Yaser Said. The son, Islam, and the brother, the uncle of the children, were also arrested and charged with federal charges for hiding Yaser for 12 years. Said was tried by a jury, and after only 3 hours of deliberating, he was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder, 1 for each of his 2 children. Yaser Said has maintained his innocence and sent several letters to the judge, one of which read, "I was not happy about my kids' dating activity, but I did not do the killings or any plan to hurt them." We are so fortunate and lucky to have Michael Jaafer with us. Big case, Mike, national trial attorney. You and I have spent time together in Atlanta. You've been on air with me, and I'm so appreciative of your expertise. I want to talk a little bit about honor killings because a lot of people think that an honor killing is synonymous with pride. And while Saeed says he's innocent, and this was not an honor killing, all of the testimony presented during the trial, especially by relatives, make it clear to me that it was just that, the murder of his own 2 teenage daughters, 17 and 18 years old, because he didn't agree with who they were dating. So I want to start there because in some cultures, Mike, honor killings are accepted, but tell us why they're not accepted in America.
So obviously honor killings are just as illegal as any other. They're like standard premeditated murder, like straight out of Central Casting. If you ever wanted a premeditated murder, that's what it is. Look, I have a Middle Eastern background, so we've heard of honor killings. Honor killings are extremely rare, and even in the Middle East, in the most dogmatic parts of the Middle East, you have to be the most vilest person of that community to even be accused of an honor killing. Honor killings have become so rare and so reviled where they were born in the Middle East, which is where they were born, right? They've become so reviled that a person who's accused of an honor killing becomes a pariah. They go to jail, they get arrested, and the Middle East is very tribal. So if you feel that somebody committed an honor killing, your tribe will be embarrassed among other tribes, and you kill that person. So a person in the Middle East that commits an honor killing has every impetus to hide it, because if it's uncovered that they did an honor killing on someone they love, they will be killed. I'm just saying the whole thing is a complete mess. But some of these idiots, these morons, bring this to the Western world. I mean, this guy, from my understanding, came here. He was living the American dream. He married a local woman. He married her when she was too young. So clearly there was something there. This is the type of person that would have fled the Middle East because he wouldn't have fit there. But he came to the greatest country in the world, and he immigrated here. As an immigrant, I know it's very hard to come here. And when you come here, you're going to come here with the honor killing mentality. Clearly there's something wrong. And so, yeah, I mean, that's my take on it. And I can be honest about it because I'm from that world. So, I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen the devastating effects of it.
Wow. So take it a step further because one of the things that people who were in the courtroom commented on during his trial, Michael, was, and I always call you Mike. I hope that's okay. Because
Yeah, of course.
but I just have to talk about the fact that he was not moved by any of the pictures, by any of the horrific details about the shooting of his two daughters. One was killed instantly, the other not, made the 911 call. He wasn't in tears. He wasn't upset. He was very stoic by all accounts during all of this forensic evidence that was presented. You have experience in major criminal trials. What does that say to you, if anything, that a father is not at all reacting, responding after shooting his two girls?
There was one honor killing I heard of that happened in Michigan, I think 35 years ago, where the father had the same exact and it was local news. So this was back I think during the Menendez brothers era, right? And we all watched it on local news. And I saw the same exact presentation by that father. And these people lived, 10 minutes away from where I'm sitting. Same exact presentation. And here's how I like it. I liken it to a disassociation with reality. He's living out a sick fantasy in his mind that he has in his mind that he did the right thing. This has nothing to do with religion, by the way. This has to do with a very old dogmatic tribal mentality that predated any type of organized religion. This is it's like in the old, for example, Japanese culture, completely different thing, but seppuku, where you kill yourself, right? What I saw from him, Judge Ashley, was a complete disassociation with reality, which shows me that, he did it, but he did it knowingly and he has no remorse. So I just saw no remorsefulness. And what I saw in this man was, if it was in the Middle East and he was uncovered having done this and he was himself being put to the sword, that would be his body language is, you know what, I did what I had to do and I'm justified in doing it. That's what I saw.
Because he's so prideful. I mean, it goes back to the 7 deadly sins that we're connecting these motives to, and I think pride at the root of it is the entire reason why he chose to kill his 2 daughters and to murder them. And when you just mentioned, his lack of reaction and stoic and seeing that, it says so much to me about who he is and his personality as a father that did it. I wanna add to that, Mike, that, um here's what he testified to, because I want you to speak about the fact he did testify in his trial, and a defendant talking or not, but also specifically what he said. Think of this. Said testified that he was driving to dinner with his daughters on the night they were killed, and he says he thought someone was following his taxi. So he didn't know who it might be, but he assumed it might be friends of his daughters. So he testified he was harmful, someone would harm him, so he left his daughters in the taxi and ran into the woods. So not only did he testify, Mike, but he made up this really bizarre, terrible cover story of what he said happened.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't shock me because clearly the conduct was so bizarre that him running into the woods, that puzzled me because you got your daughters in the taxi and you run into the woods
And leave him
because you
there.
think someone's, yeah, completely unhinged person. To even do the honor killings themselves means that the prerequisite of that person's mentality is not that of a well-adjusted person. And the conduct of running out of the taxi cab is a perfect example of not being a well-adjusted person. To be quite frank with you, I don't think I've ever heard of a person running out of a taxi, running into the woods, leaving their kids because they perceived somebody was following the taxi. So
It's because that in and of itself is
yeah,
criminal. Think about it.
yeah,
You've
yeah.
got kids, I've got kids. Oh, I think they're gonna hurt me, so I'm gonna leave my kids and run as fast as I can, and they can have them, but they're not gonna get to me. I mean, that's criminal in and of itself, let's be
Yeah, I'm gonna
honest.
jump out of a plane and leave my kids in the plane and take my
Exactly.
parachute.
Exactly, right? And then your wife's gonna kill you when she gets hold of you for doing
Yeah,
that. That's insane to me. It doesn't make sense.
none.
But who said criminals ever make sense, right? That's
Of
part of it.
course, of
Yes.
course.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, the other thing is the jury obviously agreed with you, capital murder on both counts for one for each daughter, and that was, I think, a little less than 3 hours, approximately 3 hours of deliberation. So what is it like when do you think, a person is sitting there waiting to hear their fate, but the attorney, when you hear at 3 hours, they have a verdict. I think most defense attorneys, their stomach drops and they think, "Oh, this is not good."
Yeah, I remember watching the O.J. Simpson trial growing up 8.5 months of testimony. They came back with a verdict in 4 hours, right? So it
Yeah.
was a wild card. In a case like this, not so much of a wild card. When you're the defense attorney and they come back in that short of time, I mean, it's not like they came back with an acquittal. There's really only one option at that point. You're getting convicted. And I always say that juries gravitate towards the inflammatory, right? I don't think a
Mhm.
jury of robots would have reached a different verdict. I think a jury of robots, I think a jury of humans, I think a jury of Chat GPT would have all reached the same verdict, right? So, as a defense attorney, and the defense attorneys did the best they could, because at the end of the day, they were dealt, from the bottom of the deck. They had no cards to play. So they knew what it was. But I mean, at the end of the day, what more could they do? Obviously, they came back with a guilty verdict and came in. I was surprised they came back in 3.5 hours, because again, it's so grotesque that the fact pattern, it was so inflammatory that the jury could have really reached no other verdict, in my opinion.
So, how do you represent someone like that? Let's go back to pride, because I do believe that he had an excessive love for himself. He chose that over everything else. You're dealing with this personality, you're dealing with a set of facts that it's hard forensically to get away from the fact that he was the one who did this. How do you, as a defense attorney, stand and represent someone of this character and nature?
It's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. And just so people can like peer back into it, you and I know we're initiated in this industry. This is the most difficult job of a defense attorney. This is so difficult. One time I told a friend of mine when I was coming into court on a public defense case, right? Because when you are a public defender, you had no choice in the cases. Yeah, ethically you could tell the judge, I'm ethically prohibited from representatives, but you can't really do it, because you're really going to look bad to the judge if you're kicking the
Right.
case back into her
Yeah,
or his lap,
you
right?
you're right, it's kinda suicide in terms of your work career, you just
It's
really
work
don't
suicide.
do it. Yeah.
There you go. It's work suicide. So I had made the analogy to my buddy there at the courtroom. His name was Dave, and I told him, look, I just picked up a coffee from Tim Hortons. I found myself envying the lady who served me the coffee, because
Wow.
if I could have just had her job today and be serving coffee, not coming here to try this guy who's being charged with armed robbery, and I have a deal for him, and the deal would get him out of jail in a year. He's insisting on trying his case because, according to him, his defense is, but I'm not a professional criminal. They should not charge me with this. What do I do with this person who will not talk, and he wants to testify, and he's on camera stealing? So that's the job of a defense attorney. So to take that, multiply it by 1 million, and that's the defense attorneys for this guy, because I could see what that conversation was like in the room. You're dealing with somebody who has deep narcissism, deep narcissism to a very, very unhealthy and criminal point. You have to convince him of things he has to do with his own defense. He was probably offered a deal, told his attorneys, I don't want to take it. I don't know. I'm guessing, because, these cases, there's a reason why 99% of these cases plea out, is because pleas are almost always offered. So representing this person as a defense attorney, this would have been a very jarring, thankless task with no reward. It's not like you were going to get paid $1 million. So as the attorney, and just to bring it down to its basic core, you do this for a living. You put on the suit for a living. Sometimes it's who you are, but at the end of the day, you do this to basically make a living for yourself and your family, and you do it by representing people like this, and the system needs you to do it. As a society, we need defense attorneys to do it. I've done this for a long time. It's just very difficult. It's very jarring. It's not rewarding. You're not an engineer that's building a product that's going to make people's lives happier. You're just basically, an airplane is crashing, and you are intentionally getting to the front of the plane and saying, the front of the plane needs a pilot. I guess I'll be the pilot that crashes with the plane because the plane needs a pilot. That's essentially the analogy I give people in representing these types of people in these types of cases.
And, I really appreciate your honesty, because there are so many defense attorneys clearly who love what they do, but I don't know would be that honest about what a toll it takes, because it's exhausting. I know from what I've done with my career, and I've never been a criminal defense attorney. You and I have talked about it. It's not in my nature, it's not in my makeup. but I am so thankful for every criminal defense attorney because you're defending all of our rights. So I think sometimes we have to look at it from the sense of this is not just about Yaser Said. Let me say that again, Yaser Said, and what he did to his two daughters. This is about every person having a right to due process and a fair trial and an impartial jury. And if you don't protect those rights for them, then we don't stand a chance.
Yeah, no, defense attorneys are important for the function and fabric of the jurisprudence system, which is the best jurisprudence system in the world, by the way. I can attest to that. My dad was a lawyer in another country. I can attest to the fact that our jurisprudence system is by far stands apart every other jurisprudence system, and it's hard, and it requires very, 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 very hardworking judges that are very underpaid. Every single judge in every single courtroom takes a pay cut to be a judge. And then you have the defense attorneys, and then you have the prosecutors, and you have the investigators. Then you have the homicide investigators, and then you have the homicide investigators who investigate childhood murders, which I've talked to a couple. They're in therapy their entire lives because they have to show up at the scene of the crime and see some very grotesque things that you just cannot unsee. So yeah, Yaser Said is the worst of the society, and the people who are defending him, prosecuting him, adjudicating him, those are the best of the society because we need them to step in when some really, really, really horrendous things happen, like happened in this case.
Yeah, and I can attest to the fact most people who do this for a living don't do it for the money. Defense attorneys, you are a public defender. When a defense attorney is a public defender, you're not making good money, nor the prosecutors, to your point, nor the judges. I was in that position. You have to love what you do. You have to want to do it. How do you feel, just a final thought and any wrap-up thoughts you have about the fact that he continues to proclaim his innocence? Is this unusual?
You know what? It is unusual. It actually is unusual. I mean, he's proud, maybe because of his narcissism, maybe he has been told by his attorneys, don't say anything because there might be one day we can get a compassionate release by the governor. Maybe one day we'll be able to apply for some sort of a parole. Maybe one day we can do it. Don't admit it. Maybe that's why. I would bring it back to narcissism because I'm fully convinced that he did it. I think the evidence was compelling. And really, who else would do it, right? So I do. That was off brand for a person like him. The people who've committed honor killings that I'm aware of that were in the news all admitted to it, right? It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it. It's just on brand. It's like the doomsday prophet, right? Like he was on brand, right? He got convicted. He was on brand from before he was convicted. After he was convicted, his attorney told him, give me something to work. No, I want death penalty. So criminals that commit these irrational, heinous things that defy logic, to my understanding, are almost always on brand. Him not admitting to it is just not on brand. So I did shock.
What an interesting point, because I hadn't really thought about that in terms of whether this is typical behavior or not in this kind of instance, but it is fascinating, and I go back to it's his pride. I think his pride will not allow him to admit to anything, and that pride rather led to the death of his two daughters. Michael Jaafer, big case Mike, always appreciate you. So great to have you on, and I could talk to you for hours about all of these cases, so thank you for doing this
Oh,
today.
God.
Thank you.
Thank you.